The only problem, or let's say, the deepest, most fundamental problem, or the most fundamental aspect that it is very difficult to see, or let's say, the deepest and perhaps the only sickness, the only disease that we people suffer from, is our addiction to consciousness. This addiction to consciousness is so fundamental in us that we cannot see that we suffer from it. We have no idea that we suffer from it, but it is actually a neurosis inside of us. And we are addicted to consciousness because we are addicted to that which we get access to through consciousness. We are addicted to consciousness because consciousness is the only domain through which we can achieve that which we want. Consciousness is the only medium through which we can get what we want. Consciousness is the only swimming pool that we can enter in order to find the fish that we're after. I mean, without consciousness, we don't have any ability, we don't have any possibility, we don't have any chance of connecting to that which we think is important to us. And we are addicted to that which we think is important to us. We think that, of course, everything that has to do with relationships, we are completely addicted to it in many ways. We think that we really need it. If you enter a very sincere practice of self-knowledge, of introspection, or of vipassana meditation for a long period of time, not for a month or two, but for a long period of time, you will see that this unity, the thing in you that you thought were a unity, which means you, yourself, and your consciousness, and that which consciousness delivers to you, that which consciousness gives you access to, this unity begins to become a duality. First of all, you see that, I am actually perhaps not my consciousness. I am that which is aware of my consciousness. I am the invisible knower inside myself of the consciousness. I am that in me on which consciousness stands, or I am that in me which is the invisible environment for consciousness, because we think that the world is made of consciousness and that we are consciousness. But actually, we are the experience of consciousness. We are the experience of consciousness. We are the knowledge of the fact that consciousness happens. We are the experience and the recognition. We are the recognition of the fact that consciousness happens to us and that we live our life through consciousness. If we enter a deep spiritual and introspective analysis, you could say, or inner practice, self-inquiry, you will see that it's not as easy as we thought. We think that, well, I'm consciousness, the world is consciousness. There's nothing else. I mean, I can see that I exist through consciousness. I can see that I believe in God through consciousness. I can see that I'm a communist through consciousness. I can see that the hidden regime of this country that I'm so unfortunate of staying in wants to censor me completely and wants me to not speak of all the truths that I know about the regime, for instance, all these things about suppression of freedom of speech or whatever, anything that really influences us on a very deep level, also on an emotional level. My point is that we are not the consciousness, or we are not the emotion, or we are not the recognition of suppression from another source. We are not the recognition of suppression or oppression from another source. We are that which recognizes it. We are that which recognizes the recognition. I am that which is aware of my own consciousness. I am that which is aware of the fact that I attach to all the things that I think belong to me, that is in a unity between me and the world through consciousness. I am that which believes that my life is existence in consciousness. I am that which believes that. I am that which believes that I am that which lives only in consciousness and through consciousness. But if we go deeply inside it, we can say, and we should say, well, why do I know that? Why do you know? Let me ask you this. Hello, Mr. or hello, Madam. Do you exist? Do you live? Do you exist? Yes, of course, I live, I exist, yeah. Well, how do you know? How do you know that you exist? Well, because I have consciousness. Right. How do you know that you have consciousness? This is the main question. How do you know that you have consciousness? And he or she will answer me, or you will answer me, well, because I'm self-aware. I have self-consciousness. I have self-awareness. I have knowledge of myself. Yeah, sure. How do you have that knowledge? How is it possible for you to have that knowledge? Is it because consciousness is self-aware? Is it because consciousness gives you the ability of self-consciousness, of self-awareness? Or is it perhaps because you can see that you have consciousness? You can see that that consciousness is the domain through which you live. And if the latter is the case, if the last one is the case, what does that point to? It points to another reality inside us, which means the unseen, the invisible knower inside of us. That in me which knows that consciousness exists. So we can choose. There are two ways of life. There are two ways of living. There are two ways of understanding this. I am consciousness. My life is consciousness. Which in some sense makes me a little bit helpless. I'm a victim, in a way, of that which gives me, or as the self-help people say, life happens. Life is that which happens for me. That's the solution. The solution of the little bit fake self-help people is to say that life is not what happens to you, because then you are a victim. Life is that which happens for you, which means that you're living in abundance. You have access to eternal abundance. You can get whatever you want, because life is that which happens for you. The world is that which happens for you. Well, that's great. It's fine. No problem with that. It's of course very self-centered and a little very selfish, of course. But if it works well, if it doesn't hurt anyone, if it makes you happy, if it leads to the realization of that which you want, why not? There's nothing wrong with that. Life is what happens for me. It's a kind of, that is a way. It's a strategy of coping with duality. It's a way of living life in the somewhat painful duality of existence. And the duality is that we are aware of consciousness. I know that I have consciousness, and I know that consciousness is that which makes me tired. Consciousness is that which makes my brain overwork, tired, and wants to go hide in the jungle from time to time. So a lot of the deeper scientific gurus or spiritual gurus with a scientific attitude, they say, well, what happens when you sleep? You lose yourself, you lose your attachment to consciousness, and you lose the domain of consciousness, but you're still alive, aren't you? But anyway, so you could say, all right, I am consciousness. That makes us a little bit helpless. If we say, I am that which experiences consciousness, I am that which knows that consciousness is that which is happening to me. Consciousness is that which is happening to me. Then suddenly, there's the balance of power. I am that to which consciousness happens, which means, I can close my eyes. I can, same as Nisargadatta Maharaj says, the I amness is a part of the play, and the I amness is the experience of consciousness in a way. The I amness is the experience of our own existence in consciousness. It's a psychological, emotional, perceptional experience. But so the point where I started in this talk, that's a very, very interesting point, and it's a very good point. We are addicted to consciousness because of that which consciousness gives us access to. I'm addicted. I think that I need consciousness because I need that which consciousness gives me access to, which is completely correct. If I don't accept the domain of consciousness, I cannot kill the lion, I cannot kill the deer and have food in my cave, I cannot cultivate grains, I cannot take care of my cow and my donkey. Of course, we are living through consciousness and we need that. But as a deep inner introspective spiritual practice, we can see that I am that which consciousness happens to. I'm aware of the fact that consciousness is something that happens to me, to that which I am, and I am the background. I'm the self behind the self. I'm not the self because the self is consciousness. I'm the self behind the self. I'm that which is aware of consciousness. I'm that in me which is aware of the fact that consciousness happens. So if you say that the I amness is a part of the play, then you could say, I am that which is aware of the fact that the I amness is occurring. I am that which can see my own I amness. I am that which can recognize the fact that my I amness, that my beingness is something that occurs, is something that happens to me. So if I start to recognize and honor and respect that which experiences that, then suddenly we are two in one. I am two in one, but that gives me a little breathing space, or that gives me respite, that gives me power, actually, because suddenly I'm in a position where I can choose to enter the world or not. I mean, I have a place of refuge. I have a place of refuge inside ultimate reality. I have a place of refuge inside the absolute, which is that which is aware of awareness, which is that which is conscious of consciousness, which is that which is prior to consciousness, which is that which is prior to beingness, prior to I amness. Suddenly I have that refuge. I don't have to be a victim of consciousness. I don't have to be a slave to my own addiction to that which consciousness delivers to me. I don't have to be a slave of my own addiction to that which consciousness gives me access to. This is the deepest knowledge in life. This is the deepest knowledge of the human being. This is the fundamentally deepest knowledge that a human being can ever have. I am that which can choose consciousness or refuge in my ultimate reality, in the self behind the self, in the primary, ultimate state that comes before consciousness. You know? This is quite a huge deal. It's a big deal. And it is, of course, that which makes... This is the basic thing in Advaita Vedanta philosophy that most people don't understand, even Advaita Vedanta philosophers. They don't understand this point that I've explained here today. They don't understand that I'm not consciousness. If you listen to Rupert Spira or Adyashanti or even Muji, you will come to see the fact that I've seen said a lot of times before, that they are just attached to that which is produced. The self that Rupert Spira is talking about is that which is produced in him. The self that Muji is talking about is that which is produced in him. The self, or the ultimate reality, the consciousness, the bliss, the whatever, blah blah, that Adyashanti is talking about is that which is produced in him. That is not the... That is not the final station. That is not what I'm talking about, because I am that which is aware of the fact that I have consciousness. I am the invisible knower in me. I am the unconscious consciousness. I am the unaware awareness. I am that which just in some unconscious way can perceive and knows the fact that I exist. I know that I exist because I am that which is prior to consciousness. I know that I exist because I am that which is prior to consciousness. This is the main point. I know that I exist because I am that which is prior to consciousness. This is the real deal. And Adyashanti does not give that to you. Rupert Spira does not give that to you. Muji does not give that to you. Because they say, I am awareness. That is the unity. We are all awareness. We are the same. Because they have finally understood to release themselves from the psychological self, which is the first step of spiritual practice. It's the first step of spiritual practice, to release yourself from the psychological self, to release yourself from the ego. And that is quite clever of Muji to see that the only thing in this world is to release yourself from the ego. If you can release yourself from the ego, then you will come to know the true self. If you, and that's the point. If you release yourself from the ego, then you will come to the true self, which is true. It's the very easy, it's the very simple, it's the ABC of psychological, spiritual self-knowledge, right? But that means that you are awareness. That means that Brahman or God or true self or you or me or whatever is consciousness. And that is the Shiva Shiva Shake of Muji. You know, he loves the Shiva Shiva Shake, you know. So that's how it is, you know. But that's not the point. That's just the first step. The second step and the final destination is this. I am that which knows that I exist because I am that which is prior to consciousness. I am not consciousness. I am that which is aware of the fact that consciousness happens. This is the deepest secret of Nisargadatta Maharaj also, which is not too clever to expose, which is not too clever to clearly expose, to clearly convey, to clearly point to. It takes a lot of time to decipher and deconstruct the things that Nisargadatta Maharaj says, because it's not too clear many times. But he points to the same thing as I'm pointing to in this talk. is pointing to the exactly same thing, and that is that which is Parabrahman. That is that which is the God inside of you. The God inside of you is that which is prior to consciousness. As he says that if you give up, if you donate Brahman, you will get Parabrahman. If you donate the self, if you give up the self, if you surrender the self, if you give up the self, you will get Brahman. If you give up ego, psychological self, and consciousness, you will get Brahman, the pure consciousness, the underlying consciousness of everything, that which everything exists in, the field of consciousness, the field of possibility, the field of subtle consciousness. If you give up that, if you give up Brahman, if you give up God, if you give up the world, if you give up consciousness, you will get Parabrahman, which is that which is prior to consciousness, which is that which is prior to consciousness. So if you can see that the I amness is a part of the play, it's a part of the game, it's a part of the play, then on what does that I amness stand? On what does that I amness rest? In what does that I amness exist? Well, it exists in the invisible knower. It exists in the knowledge of the fact that we exist as consciousness. It exists in the space in us where we know that consciousness is that which makes us alive. Consciousness is that which gives us that which we are related to, attached to, and of course also addicted to, blindly addicted to, because we really think we need it. But in the primary state, in the ultimate state, in ultimate reality, we don't have any needs, because consciousness is that which gives us the illusion, perhaps, that we need the thing that we think that we need. But we don't need it, except, of course, from water and food and shelter and sleep. And this is why monkhood is successful. This is why people can survive as monks and nuns and in self-retreats, in retreats from the world. Because we don't need it. It's just in our brain, it's just in our mind. We just think that we need it, but we actually don't need it. We're just addicted to it because consciousness is that which gives us access to it. And we identify with consciousness, so we think that, I need that. I need everything that I need, because I am that which needs it. I am that which needs it. I am that which wants to have this in my life. But if you're able to go very, very deeply, you will see that, well, I am that on which my I amness stands. I am that in which my I amness exists. I have self-consciousness. I have self-awareness. I am that which is aware of the fact that consciousness happens to me. I am that which is aware of the fact that consciousness happens to me, which means that I am something that is not actually reliable on consciousness. I don't need consciousness in order to be what I am. I don't rely on this. But consciousness gives me my hands and my legs. Consciousness gives me that which makes it possible for me to interact with the world and thus survive. So, of course, we need consciousness. A lot of dilettantes and amateurs would perhaps like to say that what I'm saying is that we don't need consciousness. Of course we need consciousness. Consciousness is that through which we live. But it doesn't mean that it's not. It doesn't mean that it does not exclude the possibility of the fact that, well, maybe we are something that is prior to consciousness. Maybe we are a hidden, unseen, invisible dark matter in ourself, the self behind the self. Maybe we are that, the background self. Maybe we are the underlying principle of consciousness. Maybe we are that which makes consciousness possible for us to perceive. If I were not what I am, I would not be able to know that I have consciousness. But because I am what I am, I know that I have consciousness. I know that consciousness happens to me. I know that consciousness is the domain through which I live, and the domain through which I get access to the things that I need in this life to survive and to organize a career, a personality, my life. It's that which gives me the ability to organize everything, to be everything, to incarnate into the world of consciousness, to live in the world of holograms, we could say, or to interact in the world of consciousness, because after all, that's what we do. We interact in the world of consciousness. But if we also can find refuge in that which is prior to this consciousness, then we're suddenly home free, or suddenly we have a choice. We are that which is sacred. In a way, we are the sacred reality in this world. We are the sacred reality in the world, and we have the ability and the choice to enter and control in what way we would like to interact with all the domains that exist inside consciousness. Buddhist practice is about letting go, about giving up the ego, in a way. Buddhist practice is a way of letting go of that in us which creates the desire. And if we at the end of the day can see that, well, this desire is actually just something that is produced in me because of how I grew up, it's a result of upbringing, it's a result of conditioning, then we see that, maybe this attachment to my desire, maybe this connection to my desire, maybe this unseen addiction to my own desire is not necessary. I can see that I have it, and desire is very natural, but I don't have to attach to it. I don't have to connect to it. I don't have to take it as a reality. I don't have to see it as something valid, because this is what it all comes down to. What is valid? What is it that we believe has validity? If we think that the self behind the self has validity, if we give priority to that which we think is valid, well, then we are creating our own worldview. Then we are creating our own worldview. Then we are creating our own life, our own perspective. If we give our own attention and our own priority, our own focus and attention to that which we believe in the validity of, then we are creating our own life. When we see that, this is something that I do, and I can see that from the point of that which is prior to consciousness, then suddenly we have self-awareness. Then suddenly we have a choice. Then suddenly we have more control. Then suddenly we are not helplessly living as more or less victims or slaves within the domain of consciousness. We have the ability to both find the refuge in what we could say ultimate reality, or in the primary self inside ourselves, in the self behind the self, in the background self, in that which underlies consciousness. And we have suddenly the opportunity to modify this, We can modify the valve of consciousness. We can modify to what extent we want to identify and interact with all the domains that we have access to through consciousness. Amen. Thank you. All right.